Thank you, Mr. Chair. I rise in favor of my amendment, which would prohibit federal funding for the Countering Group Extremist Activity Working or implement any recommendations from the group. In 2021, Democrats and the Biden regime unjustly used January 6th to prop up this woke working group to provide cover for unjustly targeting members of our military. The so-called Countering Group Extremist Activity Working has been weaponized and implemented to almost exclusively target Republicans, conservatives, and libertarians serving in the military. And yet, by its own metrics, it has been a massive waste of money and time. The Defense Department continues to spend large amounts of time and money to combat extremism, yet its own analysis of the situation shows that it's entirely unnecessary. In fact, fewer than 100 service members have been subject to the discipline due to engagement in extremist activities. That's only 0.005% of the approximately 2.1 million active and reserve personnel. Clearly, extremism is not the problem that my colleagues on the left and media outlets made it out to be.
My colleagues allege that the department's efforts to counter extremist activities unfairly targets conservatives. There's nothing in the Countering Extremist Activity Working Group's final report to substantiate that allegation, because violent extremism, regardless of its political or partisan leaning, is a danger to all of us and to this democracy. But there can be no denial that far-right extremism is surging across the country at a much higher level than that of left-wing extremism. A recent study showed that violent extremist acts in the United States were far more likely to be associated with far-right ideologies like white supremacy than for any far-left alternative. In fact, the level of violence perpetrated by right-wing extremists in this country is on par with, if not higher than, that of Islamist extremists.
I think it's safe to say that if you're fighting on the side of white supremacists and far-right extremists, you're probably the bad guy in this story. Now, this amendment will not make it past the Senate, but this pro-Nazi performance that you saw acted out shows exactly where the GOP's priorities lie.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I just want to reiterate quickly that this is fewer than 100 service members who have been targeted here, and that's only 0.005% of the approximately 2.1 million active and reserve personnel serving. Ultimately, wokeness, it weakens our military.
I just want to point out once again, as a United States Army combat veteran, I had served with people from different race, creeds, genders. None of that mattered. We all bled green. When we went to Iraq, we went to Afghanistan, we were sitting in Kosovo. Not once did we talk about who did you vote for, what religion do you follow, what gender do you identify as. We were a cohesive unit that believed in service. And I think that the DEI, which was actually passed in last year's NDAA in the House, should actually show that we're ready to close this because it's caused division, not inclusion. I think that we were a much stronger military with the greater recruitment efforts when you talk about the 41,000 deficit that we're seeing today, when we were prioritizing the ideas of coming together, fighting a common enemy, training as one. This is what mattered to our United States military when we strengthened ourselves, not the ideas of trying to identify ourselves as being something different, but as being one. That's what the military that I served in, that's what the military I believe in, and we need to stop allowing our militaries to only think about serving political agendas and get back to what they're supposed to do, which is serving our country. I've seen nothing but division through DEI. And one of those examples that we talk about is that we want to try and make sure everyone has a right to their own opinions. But the reality is that Tyler Boyer had a turning point event where military members attended and were actually refused to go because of being conservatives.
Gentleman's time has expired.
We need to be a stronger military. I support this amendment. I ask our colleagues to do the same.
I yelled.
Gentlelady's time has expired. Gentlelady from Hawaii is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I yield myself as much time as is remaining.
Gentlelady is recognized.
Thank you. As we previously heard, first of all, let's be clear here. We are not talking about DEI, which once again, this is an obsession of the far right in this particular body. And I would agree with you, though, in that same context of that conversation. I think we are in agreement. This is about how we should serve as one united nation? How do we serve as the United States of America as a whole? The bottom line is when we take a look at the kinds of extremist activity that is happening within our military that was found by the Countering Extremist Activity Working Group, this is not bringing our country together. This is not allowing us to stand under one common flag. A 2020 Military Times poll found that more than half of minority service members of color, say they have personally witnessed examples of white nationalism or ideologically driven racism within the ranks. And as we can recall, in June 2020, a service member of the 173rd Airborne Brigade with white supremacist leanings lead classified troop movements to facilitate an attack on his own unit while deployed to Turkey. Let's be clear here, the recommendations of the Countering Extremist Activity Working Group are not controversial. They include enhancing insider threat analysis and response, developing comprehensive training and education for departmental leadership, providing notice to personnel on prohibitive activities, and improving internal information sharing and coordination. I think we can all agree in this body, no matter what side of the aisle you sit on, this is good for us if we are truly trying to stand up to China, to Russia, and North Korea. How do we make ourselves truly a United States Department of Defense, not one that is currently divided by internal rifts, internal extremism that sadly we are seeing too often in the field and in our ranks.
Now, having far-right extremists in positions of authority is certainly nothing new for America, but the way that the Republican Party is currently using the defense budget to feed red meat, culture war, right-wing identity politics nonsense to their base, that is more modern, and it's certainly disgusting.
But let's pretend that this gentleman over here was running for county recorder, and he's a good Christian man that believes what we believe. Well, we can work with that, right? We can. That's unity. That's saying, hey, we're going to shake hands and we're going to agree that we're going to run a good Christian foundation campaign and we're going to treat each other well and we're going to get through this together, right? That's unity. But if Stephen Richer walked in this room, I would lynch him. I don't unify with people who don't believe in the principles we believe in and the American cause that founded this country. And so I want to make that clear when we talk about what it means to unify.
This administration and the radical left has an incredible thirst for power, Tony. And I would just say, I don't know how you feel, but I think we are facing the most serious threat to our country in any of our lifetimes. And I mean, maybe in the last century or more. I mean, the radical cultural Marxism, the new Marxism that is driving this administration and is driving the left, it is a thirst for power. And you're seeing it, Tony. I mean, if you disagree with them, they will come after you. They will try to shut you down. Heck, they would throw us all in jail if they could. They absolutely would. And it's an extremism of a kind we've never seen, I think, in this country before. And that is why, above all, it is a time for all conservatives, but especially for believers. It is a time for us to stand up and defend the principles of this country.
On the left, we have to be careful to know who the enemy is. And don't get it twisted, it's these people. Now, there are political enemies, to be clear, because unlike them, we find political violence utterly antithetical to our system of government and to our values and to what, at the end of the day, we want our society to be. But they are our enemies all the same, and so are the people backing them, financially and legally. Now, the right loves to project, and when Josh Hawley talks about leftist extremism, he's setting up an obvious false equivalency. And when he talks about cultural Marxism, what he means is just inclusivity. I mean, after all, how dare we as a society agree to respect and appreciate the humanity of all people? And this is coming from the guy, I'll remind you, who raised his fist to salute those preparing to storm the Capitol and kill cops and kill his colleagues and indeed his vice president. And on that topic of Marxism, did you ever notice that they never really discussed the policy positions that real Marxism would entail in practice? Maybe it has something to do with the fact that 20 years ago, even Joe Biden could have run as a Republican. Now, Josh Hawley and those like him are waging war against something that simply doesn't exist. Just as they harken back to a golden age of America that, for 99% of us at least, it never existed. But although so much of what they say and believe is nonsensical, the threat that they pose to our country and our government is real. The war is real. And the next big battle is on Election Day. When you click the join button and become a Tier 2 member, you get access to all of our weekly top 10 lists. What are you waiting for?